What's up, everybody? This is OU Insider Live. As you probably have noticed by now, I am flying solo today. We had a little bit of a change of plans. Brandon's unable to join us, so we are going to try again to get both of us on the same stream here later in the week. And then obviously our goal, for your guys' sake and for ours, is to lock into this Monday at 5 p.m. as a regular time as we kind of get our schedules ironed out for the coming spring season, 7-on-7s, recruiting trips, all of that good stuff. But the hope is that we will have a show for you every Monday at 5 p.m. right here on the OU Insider YouTube channel. Since I am alone today, probably won't go as long, 30, 45 minutes. We'll kind of see how things unfold. But with that said, if y'all have questions, go ahead and drop them in the chat below, and I will field them with help from our yet unnamed producer as we go throughout the show today. So with that, I suppose we need to start with the guy, the man of the hour, one Jackson Arnold, the four-star quarterback out of Denton-Guyer High School, who announced today his commitment to the Sooners, and he is the new Malachi Nelson in the class of 2023 for Oklahoma. Obviously, after Lincoln Riley departed for USC, the Sooners lost Nelson's commitment. He subsequently recommitted to join Riley at USC, and that left Oklahoma, at least for the moment, up a creek without a paddle when it came to the class of 2023 at the quarterback position. But Jeff Lebby moved very quickly to get that situation resolved. Obviously, one of his first objectives as offensive coordinator was to offer and get Nick Evers on a visit and subsequently sign him. So they got their guy for the class of 2022. And then there were three quarterbacks in the class of 2023 that Oklahoma was seriously pursuing. One being, of course, Arch Madness, the great to be, I suppose, the next great to be of the Manning clan, Arch Manning, the number one overall prospect in the 2023 class. They were also after Arnold and Jaden Rashada of Pittsburgh, California. Arnold and Rashada, both four-star guys with the ceiling of a five-star, guys that could very realistically rise into that range by the end of the cycle. Now, I think, and I remember posting about it last week on OUinsider.com for our VIP members, it became pretty apparent once we learned that Arch Manning wasn't going to make his decision anytime soon, and that process was likely going to drag on into the fall, that it was essentially going to be a race between Rashada and Arnold to see who the Sooners quarterback was, because whichever one of those committed first would probably be the guy, and OU would at that point back off of everybody else. Now, about that same time that I reported that, I was told by the source I spoke to that particular day that Rashada was only going to wait until probably April or May at the absolute latest to make his decision, but almost simultaneously found out that Arnold's visit at Oklahoma last weekend had gone so well that Oklahoma had begun to anticipate a potential commitment from Arnold. Lo and behold, 8 days after the visit, he is committed, and he is the Sooners quarterback of the future. Now, as far as what it means for the program, Arnold is a guy that has a really, really high ceiling just due to his competitive nature, his arm talent, his mobility. He's a true dual threat quarterback. And if you flip on the tape, it's easy to see that. He had 34 passing touchdowns and 12 rushing touchdowns for Denton-Guyer in his first season as the starter in 2021. 5 interceptions. So efficiency and accuracy, definitely hallmarks of Jackson Arnold's game. For his first 2 years at Denton-Guyer, he had sat behind Eli Stowers, who was a 4-star quarterback that signed with Texas A&M in the class of 2021, and then subsequently converted to tight end. So there really wasn't an opportunity for Arnold to make an impact much earlier than he did. But upon taking the reins of that Guyer offense, immediately thrived. So that is the guy that the Sooners are getting, somebody who's been immensely productive at the high school level in Texas, and somebody who very nearly lifted his program to a state championship victory over an Austin Westlake team that was far superior in terms of overall talent to Denton-Guyer. But for those that watched the state championship game in the state of Texas, you got a glimpse of just how good Arnold can be. And granted, he was kind of running for his life at times with that Austin Westlake defensive line pursuing him, but made some big plays in that football game, kept Guyer within striking distance for the vast majority. And eventually the Chaps were just a little too overpowering for Arnold and Guyer. But at the end of the day, still undeniably a guy with a very, very bright future at the next level. And you don't have to look any further than his offer list to give you an indication of just how good he is. Alabama was after him. Notre Dame was after him. Arkansas was after him. Ohio State as well. There were some big, big programs in the market for Jackson Arnold's services, but in the aftermath of that OU visit, OU soon took the lead, and it all culminates today, January 24th, in a commitment. And that's the other thing that is particularly encouraging about this commitment for the Sooners is the fact that they have their quarterback in the month of January. And for a lot of programs that won't get a commitment from their quarterback, of which they're in pursuit until August, September, October, that leaves those schools a lot less time to recruit around the quarterback and a lot less time for the quarterback to recruit players who gravitate towards the natural leader that generally a quarterback is on the recruiting trail. And so it's big for the Sooners because it now gives them 11 months before National Signing Day in order to build a class around Jackson Arnold as their quarterback of the future. So big, big addition for Oklahoma. And as we hit your questions, one of the first one that several of you have asked is, can OU still get Arch Manning? Well, I'll be honest. I hope not, because as you've heard both me and Brandon express on past installments of this show, the Arch Manning recruiting carousel and the circus that comes with the Manning name just naturally, and with Arch being a quarterback and the heir apparent, the prodigy of the Manning lineage and the number one consensus prospect in the 2023 class, that was never a recruitment that was going to go swimmingly and easily. It was never something that was just going to be settled. You know, Arch Manning visits a school, falls in love with it, he's committed. It was always going to be an ordeal, always going to be a process. And that process seemingly continues to drag out further and further. A couple weeks ago, we kind of had the insight that Arch Manning was maybe looking at making his decision in the spring. And then a couple weeks later, now it's been pushed back to the fall. And who knows at this point? It might, early National Signing Day might come around in December and Arch Manning could still be uncommitted. So that is one that, in addition to the fact that Arch Manning doesn't have social media, so you add up all those factors, it was going to be a very, very mentally taxing and draining process for Brandon and I to cover that one. So I know that selfishly, we were hoping that the Sooners would get a commitment from either Arnold or Rashada, just so the whole quarterback situation could essentially be resolved. Now, here's what I will say about OU's chances with Manning going forward. I would not anticipate that the Sooners are going to completely cut off contact with Arch Manning and Jaden Rashada. And that's not me sharing intel. That's just me giving you my opinion, because the reality is, in today's day and age, so much can change so quickly in the recruiting game. And it's also fluid that, say the fall rolls around, you get to October, November, and Jackson Arnold decides he wants to take a visit elsewhere. And whether that's the likes of a Notre Dame or an Ohio State, maybe he visits that school and decides he'd rather be there than Oklahoma. And at that point, that late in the cycle, you don't want to be hung out to dry, and you don't want to be without your quarterback, because once you lose the quarterback, you're going to lose some ancillary pieces with it. And so I would imagine that Jeff Lebby and that OU staff at least makes an effort to remain in touch with Arch Manning and Jaden Rashada, just in the event that anything were to change. But again, Jackson Arnold's your guy. The Sooners are going to make it clear to him that he is the guy. And as long as he stays committed, I do not anticipate that Oklahoma is going to seriously pursue any other quarterback in this 2023 class, unless it's a depth guy that is not very highly rated, just the type of player that you add for the sake of having another scholarship guy in the room. All right, back to your questions. One listener or one viewer, excuse me, asks, is Arch actually good or just ranked high because of his name? It's a little bit of both. It's a little bit of both. I think anybody who's watched Arch Manning's tape is kidding themselves if they think he is massively overrated. He's obviously a very good quarterback, and genetics means something. Growing up in a football family means something, and being surrounded by players such as Peyton and Eli, who played the game and excelled at the quarterback position at such a high level, that isn't insignificant. And I don't think that should be written off. I do think that he is quite a bit overvalued because of that name. And I think if you put any other name on the back of his jersey, he's probably not the consensus number one overall prospect, but he's still a guy that is certainly, regardless of the name on the back of his jersey, by all accounts would be a top 100, top 150 type of guy, even if you discarded his name and the prestige and the recognition that comes with that. So Arch Manning is by no means a scrub. I think he's a guy that has a multi-year future as a starter at the FBS level, and in all likelihood, an NFL future beyond that. I have never been sold on him as the consensus number one overall prospect, though. So hopefully that answers the question. And I know just from having conversations with people around the industry, it's very much everybody kind of thinks with one mind in that regard. And I shouldn't say everybody, because obviously the people who make the rankings have kept Arch at the top from the get-go in this 2023 class. But there are a lot of folks that share that same opinion, that he's good, don't get me wrong, but he's not number one good. I'll say this as well. He is athletic. And I think a lot of people think about the way Peyton and Eli played the quarterback position, and they figure, well, he's just going to be a traditional drop back pocket passer, doesn't really have a whole lot of mobility because that's the Manning way. And that's not the case. And for evidence that, you don't need to look any further than Arch's father, who is Cooper. And Cooper was going to be a Division I wide receiver at Ole Miss. Wide receiver, not quarterback. He was going to be a wide receiver before he had his well-documented health issues that forced him to step away from football. So Arch Manning comes from receiver genetics, not just quarterback genetics. So the athleticism is there. If you watch the tape, it's very clear that he is not going to have cinder block feet in the pocket the way that Peyton and Eli seem to, particularly at the tail end of their careers. But he's a guy that can move. He's a guy that can throw, and he's going to be a successful quarterback at the next level. Now, getting back to your questions here, one viewer asked, could the Arnold commitment bring any other Texas high school recruits to OU? The answer is yes, absolutely. And the first guy that you look at in that capacity, and the first guy that you want to focus on and start to maintain a cognizance of Oklahoma's standing with, is Arnold's teammate, Peyton Bowen, who at the beginning of this month committed to Notre Dame, but was once upon a time very, very high on Oklahoma, to the point where a lot of folks considered Oklahoma the leader for Bowen. Now, the old staff at OU kind of stopped recruiting him, stopped pursuing him at a certain point in time. And at that point, he began to warm to Notre Dame, ended up committing there. I would be surprised if Oklahoma doesn't try and make another push for Peyton Bowen, if for no other reason than the fact that his quarterback and his teammate at Denton Guyer is Jackson Arnold, who is now the quarterback of the future for Oklahoma. So I think Peyton Bowen's name is worth filing away. And I know that is a guy that some folks that I speak to regard as a 5-star type of talent. Now, last I checked, I believe he's top 100 in the 2023 class, one of the top 10 or 15 defensive backs. But there are those who believe Peyton Bowen's ceiling is 5-star. And so if for no other reason, then he's Jackson Arnold's teammate and was once very high on OU and is that good, you should file away Peyton Bowen's name. As far as the rest of the scene across Texas high school football, there are a lot of guys that play in the same vicinity as Arnold and play in the same district, for instance, that are going to naturally know who he is, know his name, maybe have friendships or personal relationships with him. And to be honest with you, I would have to dig a little bit more into who those individuals might be to give you a sense of who Oklahoma might pursue that comes from Arnold's circle. But that said, every quarterback's playing 7-on-7 in the offseason, generally with teammates from a whole bunch of different schools. So from that perspective, you would expect that Arnold is going to have some influence in his immediate circle, maybe on his 7-on-7 squad, or just in the vicinity, in the district. And some of those guys are going to be worth monitoring. Again, I can't throw names at you right now. It's something that I'll have to dig a little bit more into as things get going, just because this is so fresh, right? Jackson Arnold's been committed for all of 5 hours. So once we get a better sense of who those guys might be, obviously going to pass that along to our VIPs at ouinsider.com. Until then, like I said, Peyton Bowen is the one worth watching. And his younger brother, Eli Bowen, whom I believe is a 2024 or 25 defensive back, may end up being just as good as Peyton is, and another Geyer product. Here we go. Back to your questions. Where does Arnold rank in OU's current quarterback room? That's tough to say, particularly because by the time Arnold gets on campus, it could look completely different, right? Because a year ago, or even 6 months ago, when Malachi Nelson committed, Oklahoma's quarterback room consisted of Spencer Rattler, Caleb Williams, and Micah Bowens. Everybody figured that those were the three at the top of the depth chart. Well, the three at the top of the depth chart as of today are Dillon Gabriel, Nick Evers, and Ralph Rucker. So we have to take everything with a grain of salt this early in the process, because we have to acknowledge that a lot can change. You can have incoming transfers, outcoming transfers. Gabriel could light it up in 2022 and become an NFL draft pick after 1 year. So it is difficult to say. If Arnold, say, graduated early and joined the team in the class of 2022, I think there would be an intriguing battle between him, Evers, and Rucker for that backup spot right now behind Gabriel. I would give Evers the edge just because of experience and the fact that he's got an extra year of high school ball under his belt. But I do think Arnold's ceiling is probably higher than both Evers and Gabriel. So when the time comes that Jackson Arnold's playing quarterback at the University of Oklahoma, you can count on him putting up big numbers in that offense. And the comparison that a lot of folks have made is Baker Mayfield. And it seems that was the same comparison that people made for Dillon Gabriel. I know that's the comparison I made for Jackson Dart. Now, you can certainly see a little bit of Baker in the way that Jackson Arnold plays, but I also think he is more of a true dual threat than Baker was. Baker was a guy that could tuck and run for 7 or 8 yards. He could tuck the ball and punch it in at the goal line if he needed to. Arnold's very much a guy in the mold of somebody, in terms of mobility at least, in the mold of somebody like a Josh Allen, for instance, who you're not going to really regard him as a traditional dual threat in the sense that you're probably not going to see him pop off for a 70-yard touchdown run like Kyler Murray has done from time to time, or that guys like Mike Vick and Terrell Pryor used to do. But he's absolutely a guy that if the play breaks down or he's just got no options downfield, he'll scramble, he'll make a couple guys miss, and he can get you 20, 25 yards on a chunk game. He is no joke as a runner. All right, back to the questions that we have here. Jalen Hale went to A&M's junior day. Big deal. That's a question, by the way. Big deal, question mark on Jalen Hale. I'll say this much. Oklahoma did not make Jalen Hale's top 12 because it was released, I want to say, mere days after Lincoln Riley and essentially half the OU staff departed for USC. And at that point, there was a lot of uncertainty as to what the future of Oklahoma football looked like. I believe it was before Brent Venables was officially hired. So at that point, Jalen Hale, quite understandably, probably didn't view Oklahoma as a very viable option as a wide receiver. Now, naturally, things changed very quickly in the aftermath of Jeff Lebby's hiring and Cale Gundy's retention, which we all knew Cale Gundy was getting retained. But in the eyes of somebody that doesn't follow the Oklahoma football program as closely as I do, or as Brandon does, or as many of you fans do, there was going to naturally be a question in a guy like Jalen Hale's mind as to whether any members of the offensive staff were going to be retained. So, as I said, things changed very, very quickly in the aftermath of that. That is a recruitment that Gundy and Jeff Lebby have been active in. And also, Jay Valai was Jalen Hale's primary recruiter at Alabama. So now you have 3 coaches on staff that Hale has good relationships with. And OU is very, very much in the thick of this race. And Hale is a very quiet kid. He's not super forthcoming about his recruitment. You don't really get updates very often as to what he's thinking. But from everything I've heard talking to people around him and just the overall buzz from sources on the OU end and the Longview end, there's still a very good chance that Jalen Hale could be a Sooner when all is said and done. Now, I will say this. If he doesn't go to Oklahoma, I think he will be a Texas A&M Aggie. And that's a school that a lot of folks are favoring right now for Hale. Understandably so, because his former quarterback at Longview High is none other than Haynes King, who is now, of course, the starting quarterback at Texas A&M. So a lot of merit to the Jalen Hale to Texas A&M buzz. It is still too early in my mind for us to definitively know who the leader in that recruitment is. But for now, I would consider Oklahoma and Texas A&M to be the 2 programs that are in the best spot for Jalen Hale. Let's see what else we've got from you, the viewers. Harold Perkins, another A&M guy, just decommitted, 2022 5-star linebacker who was pledged to the Aggies. Will OU pursue him? No, I do not believe they will. The buzz I have heard for about a week now, this was not an unforeseen development. Let me make that clear. Harold Perkins decommitting from Texas A&M was not an unforeseen development at all. The buzz that I've heard has been largely for Florida, and I was told he may end up visiting LSU as well. That may have since been confirmed. I've been a little bit out of the loop on it, but nothing I have heard indicates that Oklahoma will pursue Harold Perkins. So that's where things stand in that recruitment. On Grayson Halton and Jamarian Burt, one viewer asks, will Burt visit Mizzou? From what I understand, yes, that visit is happening. That's why I was a little bit more hesitant, as I posted on the VIP board over at OU Insider, a little bit more hesitant initially to drop the crystal ball prediction for Jamarian Burt to OU. I feel really good about where the Sooners stand with Grayson Halton after his weekend visit, and that's reflected in my crystal ball prediction. Burt, I didn't regard as much of a sure thing up front. I still don't think it's a sure thing. Let me make that clear. But I think there is overwhelming confidence on the Oklahoma end after that weekend visit that Burt is going to be a Sooner. Again, my hesitation, my hang up was that he wasn't for sure done with visits yet. There was still the possibility of that Mizzou visit. And from everything I've been told, it appears that Mizzou visit will still happen. So not a 100% guarantee, but again, from the people I spoke with, there was enough confidence therein for me to be able to issue that crystal ball prediction and feel pretty good about it. Back to your questions. Does DeAndre Moore being teammates with Malachi Nelson make it less likely that DeAndre ends up at OU in the end? No, I don't think so. And I think DeAndre Moore is going to stick it out with Oklahoma for 2 reasons. One being DeMarco Murray. That is a recruitment that Murray has been wholly faithful throughout, and he has been ardent in his pursuit of DeAndre Moore from the get-go. Moore was one of the first guys he contacted after Lincoln Riley and Dennis Simmons and Alex Grinch and Benny Wiley packed up on that Sunday and left for USC. So again, DeMarco Murray's been very proactive. The other thing Oklahoma has working in their favor is that one of Moore's best friends in the world is Javonte Barnes, who never wavered in his desire to attend Oklahoma, even after Riley and the partial staff took off for USC. So I think Javonte Barnes selling OU to Moore is going to be big, and I think having DeMarco Murray on staff is ultimately going to be what keeps Moore locked in with Oklahoma. I would be surprised if he decommits and goes elsewhere. By the way, on the Javonte Barnes front, that is a guy that I have heard has been very impressive early on over his first couple of weeks in Norman, Oklahoma. Devin Campbell. Oh, boy. Very conflicting reports from the people I speak with regarding Devin Campbell. And again, the sum of the conversations I have had over the past couple of months continue to point towards Oklahoma as the destination for Devin Campbell, a little bit more so than Texas. Although I will say no one views either school as anything close to a guarantee right now. In fact, I talked to one individual today very close to that recruitment, and they said, look, it's as close to a 50-50 toss-up as you can get, but OU has gained a lot of ground in that recruitment. And the way I look at it, just kind of reading the tea leaves, and I mentioned this on the radio today on KREF, is that if Texas was the spot for Devin Campbell and he knew for sure that he wanted to be there, why wouldn't he have committed and signed in the early signing period with the Longhorns when they had all that momentum and they were signing all those other offensive linemen? Now, the way I look at things at the moment, he kicked the can down the road into February because he wasn't sold on Longhorns. And that's rather understandable given that they've already signed 7 offensive linemen in the class. So that is an absolutely saturated position group at the University of Texas right now. And we know Devin Campbell has an affinity for Bill Bedenbaugh. So again, I tend to lean OU right now. I haven't put a crystal ball into that effect. I probably won't, at least for the next few days, until we get a better sense of where Campbell's head is at in the days leading up to National Signing Day on February 3rd. But I am optimistic about OU's chances, and my most reliable intel suggests that OU is a slight favorite right now. Nicholas Harbor, Anthony Hill Jr., Josh Connerly. Well, let's just hit them one at a time. Harbor, many of you saw the video on Twitter of him running a 200-meter dash in 20.79 seconds, which is the 4th fastest time in U.S. history for a high school age individual. I'll just come out and say it. I think Nicholas Harbor would have committed to Oklahoma very, very expediently if Jamar Cain and that old staff at Oklahoma hadn't jumped ship. And if the Sooners had retained Cain, and I know that was a big controversy in the aftermath of Brent Venables' hiring, if the Sooners had retained Jamar Cain, they would be in the catbird seat by a mile right now for Nicholas Harbor. I mean, everything was pointing in OU's direction in that recruitment. That's why back in early November, I dropped the crystal ball for Harbor to the Sooners. Naturally, that has changed. That said, Brent Venables and Todd Bates are 2 guys that are going to have quite a say in this recruitment. And you would be hard pressed to find 2 guys that are better suited to keep Nicholas Harbor's interest in OU strong than Venables and Bates. And let's not forget to give Miguel Chavis his due, because that's a guy that's has had some very significant impact on the Sooners recruiting efforts since his arrival. So Anthony Hill, I don't know. It's very early in that process, and I don't feel comfortable saying there is a leader right now. But again, one thing Brent Venables is going to do is recruit linebackers and recruit them well. And you have to imagine that Venables' resume, which includes 4 Butkus Award winners, is going to appeal to a guy like Hill. So particularly with the Denton Ryan connection, Billy Bowman, who is good, Hill, OU is a school to watch there. I don't know that I would call them the leader, at least not yet. Josh Connerly, man, again, that's a recruitment that Josh Connerly might actually be the last player in the class of 2022, at least among the top 24/7 to commit and sign. This is one that's going to last at least until March, potentially until April, maybe even longer. There's no telling. OU definitely has the opportunity to make a strong impression on Connerly down the stretch. The visit last week went well from everything I was told. And by virtue of sheer novelty, he'd never visited Oklahoma before. That presents an opportunity for Oklahoma to leave an imprint on a guy like Connolly, more so than a school that he's traditionally more familiar with, like a Michigan or like a Washington. So we'll see how that goes. At this point, I don't know where Josh Connolly's going to end up, and I don't think anybody does. I don't think anybody even has a sense of where he's leaning at the moment. So again, that is one that we will continue to update y'all on over the next few weeks, but don't expect it to come to a resolution anytime soon. One listener asked, wouldn't Gentry have signed in the early signing period if he was totally sold on OU? And I feel like I've addressed this situation every day for about a month and a half now. Gentry Williams is 100% going to be a Sooner. Lock it down. You don't need to give it any more thought. He's going to sign with OU in February. The reason he didn't in December was because at that point, Oklahoma didn't have a cornerbacks coach hired. Gentry didn't know who he was going to be working with, who was going to be coaching his position group. And so that naturally led to a bit of reticence on his part. And it's somewhat understandable that he didn't sign at that time. That said, since Jay Valai was brought on staff, those two have formed a fast friendship, and the vibes between Williams and the new OU staff as a whole have been overwhelmingly positive. He is not going anywhere else. I was already told that the visit to Florida that had been rumored this coming weekend will not happen, and that he is 100% locked in with the Sooners. So do not fret about that one. Any word on Moton and Mason Thomas, asks one viewer. Now, I am catching up with both those guys later tonight, so I will be able to give you a better idea then. That said, I know from the OU end, from people I've talked to close to the program, there is a healthy degree of apprehension and a bit of skepticism regarding Moton and Thomas and Oklahoma. Now, a month ago, everything was trending in the Sooners' direction with those two. Everything. Thomas has a great relationship with Venables going back to his days at Clemson, and Moton was really feeling the love from the Sooners as well. Then Mario Cristobal got hired at Miami, brought on his new staff. Miami has the hometown flavor with two guys at Cardinal Gibbons High School in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. So folks on the OU end are wary of those two visiting Miami this upcoming weekend. And if it is not Oklahoma, I would expect Miami to be the school that foils the Sooners' best laid plans there. Now, that said, Oklahoma has done a good job of hedging their bets in the event that Miami does end up with Moton and Thomas, because obviously they're in a phenomenal spot with Grayson Halton. They hosted four-star linebacker and Michigan commit Cavante Henry last week on an OV, and things went outstanding on that visit between OU and Henry as well. So I don't know at this point if Moton and Thomas are guys that OU has to have. It'd obviously be great to have them, and they're two really talented football players, criminally underrated if you look at their tape, but it's not a backbreaker if those two choose to stay home and play at Miami. A couple more questions to get to before we jump out of here. On Micah Ts, I know a lot of folks are wondering about him lately. He posted pictures from his official visit to Arkansas. He posted his Jackson State offer yesterday. Look, at this point, the Sooners are absolutely the overwhelming favorite for Micah Ts. I've had a crystal ball in for a long, long time, and I would be very surprised if things start to trend in any other direction, because you have his brother, who was a walk-on at Oklahoma and eventually earned a scholarship, worked his way into a starting role. So he's got familial history with the university, and with his former teammate, Gentry Williams, set to sign with OU as well. He's going to have a lot of people in his ear advertising Oklahoma, as if his bond with the university and his affinity for the OU brand wasn't already strong enough. So I would pump the brakes on any doubt that Micah Ts is going to end up a Sooner, because at least right now, I just don't get the sense that any other school is going to be able to make a legitimate run. I think the one school I would probably watch for would be Notre Dame. And I guess with the momentum that Arkansas has on the recruiting trail right now, they're worth keeping an eye on as well. But I do consider OU the overwhelming favorite. Now, a lot of folks asking about Jackson Dart, so let's just go ahead and dive into that. Now, this is a tough situation. Tough in the sense that I don't really have a lot to offer. And to be honest with you, nobody has a lot to offer because nothing has changed. There have been virtually no updates and no movement with regard to Jackson Dart and Michael Trigg for the last 5 or 6 days. I mean, essentially, everybody's been sitting on their hands for the better part of a week right now, just waiting for something, anything that would indicate Jackson Dart is leaning toward Oklahoma, or he's leaning toward Ole Miss, or returning to USC, or maybe staying home at BYU. So, again, I wish I could give you all a better idea of what is going on right now, but the harsh reality is that nobody really knows. And it is all quiet on the Western frontier with regard to those two. I get the sense the longer this drags out, the better it looks for Dart to go to BYU or to return to USC, just because those were two options that were not initially on the table. And so the fact that he hasn't chosen between Ole Miss and Oklahoma at this point in the process would lead me to believe that maybe he's not 100% sold on either of those options. Maybe he realizes now that Caleb Williams isn't headed lock, stock, and barrel to USC, and he has the opportunity to return there and be the surefire starter. And maybe he's feeling a desire to stay close to home and play at BYU. Again, tough to tell. But the fact that Jackson Dart took the visit to BYU was kind of my first indication, and the first indication to a lot of people, that maybe, just maybe, Dart and Trigg aren't a package deal. Maybe they could end up different places. It's hard to say. And once again, would love to give you some reliable intel and an update on the situation. But from every camp, Ole Miss, OU, BYU, USC, there just hasn't been much of an update at all, much of anything new over the past few days. And so hopefully things the wheels start to turn once again. There were the reports and the rumors out there that Ole Miss was doing an in-home with Dart today. So maybe this whole thing is winding down to a conclusion. There's also the theory out there that maybe Dart is waiting on Caleb Williams to make his decision, which I'll just say this. If that's the case, we're going to be waiting a whole lot longer for these two to decide. But I'm not convinced that's the case. One viewer says, Caleb is going to USC, stop the madness. Yeah, look, at the end of the day, that's probably where the smart money lies, just because of his connection to Riley. But I'm not 100% sold on USC being the destination. As I've said time and time again over the last week, as things stand right now, I actually favor UCLA. But again, smart money, all things considered, is probably on USC. Let's see what else we have to get to before we wrap it here. Thoughts on the current offensive line? I think the big question for me heading into 2022 is who's going to be the right tackle, because the Sooners are losing 2 members of their starting offensive line from a year ago, that being Marquise Hayes, the left guard, and Tyrese Robinson, the right tackle. Now, you bring in McCade Mettauer, who was a 3-year starter at Cal via the transfer portal. That seems to me like a plug-and-play option at left guard. Just a guy that you slot into Marquise Hayes' old role and say, go. Now, there have been some rumblings that Bray Walker's doing some impressive things in early season testing. But that said, we're still talking about Bray Walker, a guy that brought all the hype in the world to Norman, Oklahoma from right up the road in Westmore, and has never done much of anything in an Oklahoma uniform. So I'm going to have to see it to believe it before I start buying the hype on Walker. The battle for the right tackle position, to me, that is the lingering question mark with regard to this offensive line. I really like Savion Byrd as a prospect. I think he's got a very legitimate shot to compete for this role. Marcus Alexander might make a push. I know there's some confidence that Aaron Parks is about to make a big step forward. There are a lot of guys that could factor into that discussion as to who the starting right tackle might be at Oklahoma in 2022. I lean towards Byrd getting the gig just because physically I think he has the highest ceiling and I love his skill set. But that will be something to track as we get on into the spring and as things turn over to summer workouts and fall camp. Who is repping at right tackle and who has the inside track to inherit Tyrese Robinson's old role. I think with that, we will probably wrap it up here. We're at about 45 minutes. So again, for those of you that missed it earlier, Brandon couldn't make it this time around, had a little bit of a change of schedule. But we will try to get both of us on the same stream later in the week. Without question, we'll be back next Monday to do another stream here for you on OU Insider Live. I believe we are still running the 50% off promo through midnight tonight at ouinsider.com. So if you are not a VIP over there, head there, sign up. Less than $5 a month if you buy an annual membership today, or you can pay $1 for your very first month trial run. If you don't like it after a month, cancel, no hard feelings. But if you'd like to stay on and you're liking the insider information that you're being fed by myself and Brandon and Joey, then you're welcome to stay along with us. And obviously we have had membership explode since the coaching search. The community over there at OU Insider is fantastic, and the message boards are as loaded with topics as they have ever been in the history of our site. So head over there for VIP insider information on the program, on recruiting, on the team, whatever Sooner insights you are dying to hear and dying to receive. They are over there at ouinsider.com in some capacity. But with that, we're going to wrap it up. And stay tuned to ouinsider.com for updates on our next stream, as well as the latest information every single day from myself and Brandon and Joey. Follow us on Twitter at OU247 and on Instagram at OUinsider247 for live real-time updates on everything happening in the world of Sooner athletics. We'll see y'all next time.